It's my experience that people are a lot more sympathetic if they can see you hurting, and for the millionth time in my life, I wish for measles or smallpox or some easily understood disease just to make it easier on me and them. Jennifer Niven, Holding Up the Universe, which is a book on mental illness. So basically, mental illness affects a lot of people. It's actually very common in college students especially. It's 18.5 or 1 in 5 people are affected with a mental illness every day, or not every day, in total, sorry. And so it's a big problem, and people point to the fact that it can increase crime, and it can increase problems, and it can increase hospitalizations and resources that are needed other places. However, people are encouraged to get treatment. However, a lot of people don't get treatment because they're worried that they're going to be stigmatized by their family or stigmatized by people around them because it's so misunderstood. And so, or they just feel that they already feel insane, so getting treatment is just going to prove the fact that they're insane. And so, however, I believe that we should implement involuntary treatment for the mentally ill. So today I'm going to talk about why we should implement involuntary treatment for the mentally ill, because it helps reduce hospitalizations, incarcerations, homelessness, and emergency contacts, and it keeps the community and the people suffering safer. So first off, Laura's Law is the California law that states that, so California has a law that in cases of life or death situations, such as someone's going to commit suicide, you can call 911 for them and force them to go get treatment, but it only happens in cases of life or death. So under Laura's Law was implemented in 2001 when Laura Wilcox, a mental health professional, was shot and killed by a mentally ill patient, and it is proven to have reduced hospitalizations. Implementing Laura's Law has proven to reduce hospitalizations of the mentally ill in extreme situations by 46%. It has served to reduce incarcerations by 65%. It has served to reduce homelessness of the mentally ill by 61%, and use of emergency contacts, which are people calling 911 for someone else, by 44%. Also, Laura's Law saves $1.82 to $2.52 for every dollar spent on hospitalizations, incarcerations, homelessness, emergency contacts, because it's getting treatment for the mentally ill that they don't later, because a lot of times when people don't get treatment, they'll be hospitalized twice or 3 times or 4 times, or where when they're getting treatment, once their treatment is over, they are more likely to not need the resources as much, so it's saving more money than spending. Also, it keeps, by implementing involuntary treatment, we keep people out of prison, and that may sound like a bad idea to all of you. You're like, well, some of them are violent. Actually, it's a very small number of people with a mental illness that are violent, and it is most common among schizophrenia. However, not all schizophrenics are violent. So 15 to 20% of incarcerated people, according to Avoiding Jail Pays Off, are mentally ill. And this is not a great thing because it costs a lot of money to put people in jail, first off. And also, it's not safe for them. And so it encourages an increasing number of suicides. So in 2015, according to Gerald Landsberg, a researcher on mental illness in prisons, 327 prison suicides were committed in 2015. And mentally ill have a 10 to 15 times higher rate to commit suicide than anyone else in prison, according to mentalhealth.org. And they're also learning violence in prison. So there are some people who are mentally ill that will go into prison because they committed a crime like stealing or something, and because of California's laws, we're supposed to categorize people by if they're a class A or a class, so we have a range of class A to class D violence, and the problem is California doesn't really separate like they should, And so we're getting people who just like stole something with people who are criminals, and they're or like hardened criminals, and they're learning violence in prison. So when they come out, they're actually more violent than they were just before. So getting treatment will help that, keeping them from learning violence. Also, implementing involuntary treatment keeps them off the streets. It reduces homelessness, because when you're getting them treatment, a large percentage of the homeless are mentally ill. So by getting them treatment, it allows them to keep working, and because they may not be competent to get a job, competent enough to get a job, or employers may discriminate against them if they're too unstable. So by getting treatment, we can help them keep a job and keep working and keep them off the streets, which in turn reduces violence and things. Also, it increases community safety. So there's this one case, Gregory Murphy and Kevin Shiflett. I don't know if any of you know of it, but basically there was this 8-year-old boy, and he was playing in his grandparents' front yard, and he was shot and killed by a mentally ill patient. And he wasn't a patient, he was just mentally ill. And they took him to trial, and it was later discovered that he had been mentally ill for a while, and people could have easily said that he was mentally ill. And he was obsessed with this thing he called the machine and the number 5. And so he could have gotten treatment, but he refused to get treatment. And because of that, a 8-year-old boy was killed. And so by implementing involuntary treatment, we can encourage safety and community safety and keep people from getting killed. The counter argument to this is first off, it takes away their civil rights. But if someone is not competent enough to stand trial if they commit a crime, then they're not competent enough to make their own choices about whether or not they should get treatment. Because if they can't have their own rights in a trial because they're not stable enough, then they shouldn't have their own rights about whether or not they get treatment, because it's for the good of everyone else. And also their other big argument is that it costs too much to treat them. However, according to Avoiding Jail Pays Off, it costs $26 a day to treat someone and $65 a day to incarcerate someone. And also, according to John E. Davis, a representative of Texas, you can pay now or you're going to pay later. So in conclusion, by implementing involuntary treatment, we keep the community safer, we keep the people who are mentally ill safer, and we decrease hospitalizations, incarcerations, use of emergency contacts, and homelessness.
All right, well, Luis, that was the speech that you were going to evaluate. We'll figure it out here in just a second. Juan, though, is here. Tell us what you thought, Juan.
Well, I thought the purpose was a little unclear at first, and the intro was a bit confusing from my perspective. The facts I like the facts and the whys and cuz, but the structure it seemed more like it was an informative speech than more of a persuasive type. Like I was getting more of facts than positions, if you will. And then pretty much that's about it, what I can say, yeah.
All right.
I've seen thus far.
Well, I like the quote at the beginning, and I think it does a pretty good job at getting our attention. The statistic about the number of people who have some type of mental illness, even if it's not on a daily basis, was fine. That makes it relevant to the audience. There is a preview in the speech, but I'm not sure that anybody would realize it's the preview. It's kind of buried in this quote that you have. So I do see that there is a structure to the speech. I think you could be a little bit clearer about that, but I didn't think that it was disorganized. I thought that it actually developed pretty effectively. I do think starting with the cost issue is a little problematic because it's less interesting and it doesn't have that emotional resonance to it. It probably would have been a good idea to start with that case about the guy who was mentally ill and killed the 8-year-old, and we knew that this was a problem and nobody did anything about it, and maybe get a little bit of story about the kid, for instance, and his family and the consequences there to put some more pathos in it, and then use that as the lead into those arguments. And then the cost issue, kind of comes up again at the end of the presentation, so maybe you could have put it all of the cost arguments there further at the end. I think that might have worked a little bit more as an organizational thing for the persuasive presentation. That's kind of dealing with the reservation argument that people might have about this, and the need argument, I think, is really, you can create, you've got the one example there. We've got some information about how many people have these kinds of problems. There was some statistical information about how many people in prisons have these sorts of issues on a daily basis. I do think you could use a few more incidents of situations, maybe not necessarily that they were deadly situations, but people who are homeless or people who could be mainstream back into life, benefiting from getting treatment, to use to show us why this is something that's really valuable early on. And I think that would work a little bit better. But I thought you did a good job in presenting the information, especially about the cost issue and about the criminal process there. There were a couple places early on that made assumptions that people were not getting this kind of treatment, and I didn't think that you did much to document that. And then there was one place where you had a whole series of statistics that you presented that didn't get any source citation on it. The further you got into the presentation, though, the more consistent you were about citing that information. Presentation issues, I think your voice is energetic, your gestures seem engaged a little bit. They're maybe a little limited because of the cards, but not that much. Of course, I got excellent eye contact, but I don't know that anybody else in the room felt that way. I think it was like you delivered the whole speech to me, and nobody else was in the room as far as you were concerned. Did you guys notice that? Didn't it seem like she's doing all her talking to me? And sometimes that's the camera becomes a magnet. People just kind of get absorbed in that. I remember when my kids were little and they went to a dance class and they had their recital. Man, you get out a camera, and my oldest daughter was she would just look only at the camera. She would not pay attention to anything else. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that that's exactly what was going on, but sometimes it is. What happens is people kind of get absorbed in,
I was trying not to look at the note cards so much.
Yeah. But, they're nice people over there and over here and down front. You give them a little bit more attention. Okay, thank you.